Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Grace Nerd. So it is now November 16th, at least the time of recording this video, and about 11 days ago, Donald Trump won. And so it's about time I talked about it. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome back to Grace Nerd. My name is Eric if you're new. It's been a little while since I've done just a straight up vlog and felt like this was a good time to do it. Much has been going on. So I figured I would just do a nice short video and give a few thoughts because there have been a lot of things sort of brewing in my mind as Election Day was sort of approaching, as I watched people talk about it online, as I got a feel for where different conservative Christians were at regarding everything. And honestly, if I wanted to sort of use just a term to describe how I have felt since, is that I have felt pretty validated in regard to a lot of the feelings I had watching people speak about this in ways that I agreed with or disagreed with. And because I feel validated, and because I've gotten a little bit of a confidence boost in regard to sort of reading the atmosphere of culture at the moment, I feel a little more confident in perhaps giving you some predictions as to what I see coming in a second Trump term. So stick around if you want to hear the few things that I want to say. If you're a friend of mine and you've read what I've been saying on social media, particularly on Facebook lately, you'll see that really sort of an emotion that was developing as Election Day approached was really a feeling of frustration, honestly, as I saw a lot of conservative Christians, particularly after 2020, they were turning to what I started calling black-pilled doomer attitudes. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people felt that, the last election was stolen. And I think we can all agree that in every election there is fraud. And there's an argument that there may have been a lot more in 2020. And at the very least, we do know that a lot of rules were changed because of COVID. I'm not going to come down with a final opinion in this particular video. You can, believe what you like about that. It was a pretty messy election and it was pretty frustrating to observe and have in the back of our minds as this one approached. But regardless of how you feel about that, personally, I felt that regardless of what happened in 2020, I was pretty confident that Donald Trump would win in 2024. And that even if there were significant issues that caused him to unfairly lose the election, I felt that it was very likely Republicans had taken measures to ward off some of those dangers and really try to make sure everything happened efficiently and fairly. And it looks like that's really what happened. It looks like a lot of work went into giving a clean victory to Donald Trump. And I think both sides are probably deep down pretty grateful that things were decided on Election Day. And honestly, like I said, in the days afterwards, I have felt relieved and I have felt, again, validated, vindicated, because one of the things that I saw, particularly older Christians talking about on social media and in my personal life, some were speaking as if 2016 was probably the last free and fair election we were ever going to have. And if you've seen me talk particularly about, eschatology, also known as end times theology, a lot of Christians today hold to a much more pessimistic view of the future, whereas I've gone into different reasons why I hold to a post-millennial eschatology, which in short is a much more definitionally optimistic view of the future. That's not to say that entire societies might come and go and that there will be dark times and bright times for the church in the process of waiting for the return of Christ. All of that fits into post-millennial theology as a potential possibility for the future. But again, post-millennialism is an optimistic view of the future. Ultimately, it's a view that Christ will overcome all of his enemies before his return, and then when he returns, the last enemy that will be destroyed is death. That's a much longer discussion. It's a bit of a bunny trail, but I suppose it's fitting because this is a little bit of a predictions video, but it's only partially related because this is not an end times video. That's not what I meant by predictions. Ultimately, what I want to talk about now is sort of the things that I see happening again in the second Trump term and how Christians should respond to it, where we should be optimistic, where we should be realistic, where we maybe should be pessimistic. And so let's go ahead and start with number one. And I think a lot of people feel this way. I do think that it is right to expect that we're going to see a lot of economic improvements. I think prices will go down in a lot of ways. I think fuel costs will go down. I think that the economy will be freed up and be given opportunities to grow. And I think we are going to do financially better over the next 4 years. And I think that's a safe assessment of what's going to come. So that's number one. That's nothing too terribly complicated, but that's, I think, an instinct a lot of people have, and I think it's a good one. Number two, I think that when we look at the Democratic Party over the next 4 years, I do think that they are ultimately going to moderate, at least in a superficial sense. Not universally. There's definitely plenty of crazy freak out videos that we're seeing, on TikTok and Twitter and,
I'm sorry. No. Why? Why? Do you really hate me that bad?
Some Schadenfreude, as they call it, has definitely been on the menu in the past week or so, and don't think there's anything wrong with enjoying that a little bit. There was definitely a lot of arrogance and a lot of overconfidence among many on the left, and seeing them sort of come to a realization that a lot of people in the country don't agree with them. It can be kind of fun to see people come to a realization like that kind of breaks their brain. And so, yes, there's definitely plenty of places where moderation is definitely not the response we've seen. And there's definitely some much more far left news networks like MSNBC where you've seen anything but moderation. But I do think we've seen little glimpses, even on some of those networks, even on CNN, where some of the commentators are willing to say, look, maybe we can look in the mirror, maybe we can change our vocabulary, maybe we can talk about these things a little bit differently, maybe we have something to learn from this election. Again, that's far from the universal response, but I have seen it a little bit. But again, I think a lot of us suspect that even when we do see these more hopeful responses on the left, it's likely that it's strategic and not sincere. We've seen, for instance, AOC recently has taken pronouns out of her bio, which is interesting. And she's put out some, I think, Instagram posts where she said, if you're a Trump supporter, please tell me what sort of places you're getting your news. Share sources with me. I want to read them. I want to look at them.
As a matter of fact, let's do this right now. If you voted for Donald Trump and me, or if you voted for Donald Trump and voted Democratic down ballot, I would really love to hear from you. This is not a place of judgment. I'm not going to put your stuff on blast or anything like that or dunk on it. That's genuinely not the intent here. I actually want to learn from you. I want to hear what you were thinking. And I just want to hear from you. So if you did that, I don't even know if anybody like that is even watching this right now. But if you are, please fill out our little Q&A here and just tell me what your thought process was.
And I think one of the reasons she did this is because it became clear that there were people who at the top of the ballot voted for Donald Trump, but below that voted for her on the same ballot. And she didn't understand why. And this has been the story in different places. And so she, for whatever reason, probably really is curious as to why that is. The ways that she may be shifting her tone may not have anything to do with the reasons that we would like. But one thing I will say is that even if there is a moderating in the messaging from the Democratic Party that happens, even if it's coming from a completely insincere and completely cynical place on their part, that is going to have an impact on their constituents, and that it is going to have an impact on the airways. It is going to have an impact on the atmosphere of the country, wherever it's coming from. And I don't think that's ultimately a negative thing. I just think that we still need to be prudent and we still need to be discerning. And I think it's going to take years and years and years, for me at least, to gain any kind of trust in the Democratic Party. But again, this is just a prediction, and it's based on a few things we're seeing. I do think it's going to increase, particularly if Democrats really ever want to win with any kind of consistency again. And prediction number 3 has a few different meanings to it, but ultimately I would state it as, over the next 4 years, Donald Trump is still going to be Donald Trump. And few different meanings might pop into your mind when I say that, and I probably mean all of them. I think we all know at this point that Donald Trump is not exactly ideological. Trump is somebody who values loyalty, He's somebody who values, I think, the relationships that he has. When somebody likes him and supports him and speaks well of him, he tends to favor that person. One benefit of this is that if one of these relationships is established with a truly conservative Christian who can have a voice in his policies, I think it actually can affect his policies. And from what I hear from different pastors that I see online, different people who have some secondhand connection or some relationship with someone who has a relationship with Trump, I do hear optimistic things in regard to the kind of people that Trump is surrounding himself with. There are some true good Christian people who are around him and who may be able to have an impact. So that should be an encouraging thing. But on the other hand, we know that Donald Trump, he still has a lot of relationships in his life with people probably more center left, and they will have a say, particularly if we look at sort of the quote unquote dream team he's put together. A lot of Democrats have crossed the aisle because of the insanity on the left, and they haven't fully abandoned their liberalism, but they do like the more common sense ideas that they're seeing remaining in the Republican Party. And so those people are going to have a say in Donald Trump's policies as well and in his decisions. So I think we, again, saw all of this in his first term. I think we're going to see it in his second term. I do think the people he puts around him are going to be a more stable group this time. From what I understand, it was a little bit more of a surprise the first time when he won, and he was not as prepared to put people he trusted around himself. And a lot of people were rushed into positions that they did not occupy for long. I think that's going to be a little more stable this time around. And so in short, what I would say is there are going to be, I think, some pleasant surprises in the second term in regards to some of the policies and some of the decisions we see. And I think there's going to be some very predictable disappointments. I think you're going to see a fulfillment of Trump's promises not to sign a national abortion ban. I think there's benefits to it having gone to the states with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, but ultimately that's just sort of a halfway measure at best towards what ultimately needs to happen. I don't think this should be a state issue in the long run. I do think that ultimately the right to life is foundational to American values, at least it should be. I think that was ultimately assumed by the founders. I think they'd be appalled by where our society is on this issue today. And so I think a national federal abortion ban would be the right thing. And I don't think Trump was pretending to be more liberal than he actually is when he promised not to sign an abortion ban. And so barring a miracle, I think he's going to follow through on that. And Christians are going to have to work and be honest about those kinds of contradictions in the Trump platform and those contradictions that he has with actual faithful Christian ideas. And along with that, I think we're going to see not a radical focus on LGBTQ, etc. issues from Donald Trump, but what a lot of people don't realize is that President Trump was actually the first president to enter office in favor of gay marriage. From what I've heard, he hosted gay weddings in Trump Tower in the past, and I've heard plenty of statements from him in support of these sort of things. And this ultimately does stand in opposition to, again, basic Christian traditional values and our views of what marriage is, about the nature of human beings. And yeah, again, barring a miracle of many of Trump's long-held opinions changing all of a sudden, I think we're going to continue to see this sort of compromise. And I say all that to say this shouldn't shock us. And I don't think Christians should be devastated in the sense of being shocked. I think this has been baked in already. Ultimately, this is one of the reasons I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016. At that point, I didn't really see a clear binary choice between him and Hillary Clinton. I remember statements he made that I saw revealed from CNN, I think back in the 90s, where he said he was pro-choice in every respect. I remember when he affirmed gay marriage on the radio. And, this was all in the back of my mind. And ultimately, I saw no reason to trust his promises and his statements towards Christians back in 2016. I saw it as clear pandering. I remember when someone brought up that quote that I mentioned from CNN about him being pro-choice, they brought it up to him on the campaign trail. And rather than just saying he had changed his mind since then, when he said that he was pro-life, he said that he had never said those things, ultimately. He's like, go back and look at the tape. And I'm like, sorry, I just watched it. But, if he had went ahead and said that he had changed his mind, at least that's plausible. And, I could at least hope that he wasn't just pandering. But if you're going to tell me you never said it, well, now I know you're pandering and there's no denying it. But ultimately, obviously, post-2016, we got excellent Supreme Court justice picks and Roe v. Wade was overturned. And, that ultimately gave me a track record where I could vote for Trump in 2020. So sort of these moral calculations and how I process these compromises and flaws in Donald Trump's worldview, that was sort of settled for me in 2020. And I did change a little bit in how I thought about it, in that back in 2016, basically I said, I'm not going to vote for a candidate unless they are truly ideologically pure on the topic of being pro-life. And by 2020, I ultimately was willing to say, I will vote for the most conservative candidate on this issue who has the possibility of winning. And if there was any change that took place over the course of the last, 8 years, that was it. And I haven't shifted much beyond that. Rather than saying my vote for Trump is an endorsement of every view he has, I ultimately see it, like many do, as a chess move that will hopefully bring us closer to a Christian worldview than we would have had given a vote for the other candidate. And ultimately, I believe that these issues, they're going to be a multi-generational fight, and we need to be in it for the long run. And when people say that a president is not our savior, but they do it out of some sort of discouragement in voting for them, I don't fully understand that. I'm willing to make a vote like this precisely because I don't see Donald Trump as our savior. I see him as a potential flawed vessel that God could use to bring us a measure of what we're hoping for while we continue to do the work from a more pure Christian worldview on the ground. And then when culture more fully shifts, we can then hopefully end up with much more ideal candidates who are actually going to push for our values from their actual heart, not merely to pander to Christians so that they can earn our votes. And so I'm sort of a bit of a divided mind on the topic of calling out Trump on his ideological flaws. I absolutely think we should call him out. We should continue to be consistent in our Christian witness, consistent in our values. We shouldn't compromise while we sit under a compromised president on these issues. But at the same time, there has been a certain subset of Christian leaders who, I think some of them even voted for Trump, but when they call him out, when he exposes his flaws consistently in these ways, each and every time they do, they speak with some sort of surprise, as if somehow this changes the calculus in regard to whether or not we should have voted for him. And they'll say something like, look, see, Trump said this, Trump appointed this person, Trump compromised in this way, and you said it was fine to vote for him, Christians. And I see this repeatedly, and it tends to happen when Trump does something that was perfectly within the bounds of what I would expect from him. And it in no way puts him in a bad enough category that I would lump him in with who the Democratic candidate would have been and what they would have done. And so, again, I'm in favor of calling those things out, but I don't know. I get a little frustrated and confused when Christians come out and speak of these things like horribly shocking surprises. I think we should be saddened when we're reminded of these things, but I think we should be matter of fact about it and continue to pray and continue to push for those things in the ways that we can in our personal lives and in our local communities. Again, you can agree or disagree with my way that I've chosen to balance that out, but I will say I do think that ultimately we do agree in principle and we do need to maintain our Christian convictions. But I think we need to be realistic about what's to come over the next 4 years. And so there's my thoughts. I will say that I think I speak for many of us when I say that the primary emotion that we've had over the past week and a half or so has been positive. It's been a feeling of relief. And I think that I've heard many Christians say, probably rightly, that in many ways our nation is in this very moment still very much under the judgment of God in many ways. In many ways, he's handed us over to a great many evils. And yet, I would say that this past election, at the very least, can be seen as a small mercy from him. It's a mercy, at least in the sense that he is giving us more space to fight for our beliefs. There's at least space to truly be who we are as Christians, to say what we believe as Christians without as much backlash, without as much censorship. Whether or not Trump truly loves Christianity from the heart, he certainly is far more willing to make space for it than the current Democratic Party is. And so I'm grateful for that. And I imagine many of you are as well. And so there's my thoughts. It's sort of a mixture of reflecting on the past, 8 years, sharing some of my reasoning, sharing some of my feelings, and mixing in some predictions. Some of them might be obvious to you. Some of them might not have been. So maybe you learned something, at least as far as what I think is going to happen. If you have different opinions, feel free to share them down below. And we will talk again later. Thanks for watching.